Good evening. Nice to see you all again. Thanks to Wolf and his team for an extraordinary production, which is to the north in the gallery. I think what we want to do are a couple items. I put together a few images, and hopefully it won't take too long to go through, and then Wolf has it's not presentation and rebuttal, it's just two different vantage points. So let me start, and then if it gets tedious, you can, so this is interrogatory for you. Okay. So the first, this is the name of the firm. Most of the firms we're acquainted with carry the names, not all, but carry the names of the owners or the architects. This is a different kind of nomenclature. It also has to do with language, and we get into that in a moment, because there's obviously a double meaning that belongs to the German, but isn't recognizable in English. So the first question is, what's the meaning of your firm's name? So those who don't speak German would like to know that.
You mean
in English.
The double meaning.
As many meanings as you like.
Maybe
just
the 100
to translate.
takes too long.
Oh yeah.
Himmelblau means sky blue. So Himmel means sky and Blau means blue. If you erase the L, Blau turns to building. So building the sky from sky blue or blue sky to building the sky. We changed the name when we started to build. From, yeah.
You changed the name when you started to build the sky.
Yeah.
What does it mean to build the sky? No, that's not such an easy question. Come on.
Yeah, you have the word skyscraper.
Right.
Yeah, so.
But the skyscraper doesn't actually scrape it. It misses.
No, it comes from the Tower of Babel. Maybe you know the painting, yeah? The unfinished tower, and on the right side there's a cloud. And when we started to think about architecture, we wanted to finish the Tower of Babel. But this was a big task. So we couldn't make that in 1 year. So we started to build a detail of this painting, and this is the cloud. So we always refer to blue and sky and clouds.
I mean, there is something, I don't know, poetic is the word, but there's something appealing in trying to build something you can't quite describe and you can't reach. But you can see, in a way, but what you see changes its form almost as soon as you look at it. So looking at it from an English language perspective, so trying to build that could mean trying to build something which you can't build, in a way. But
it's also in German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
therefore, we didn't build that much.
Okay. So this you remember. Yeah, I know. This is what Wolf refers to. I want to say pejoratively, but I don't really mean that. For the illiterati who don't speak German and speak English, Goethi. So this is Goethi. So if I say something about
So how do you pronounce Kafka?
Kafka.
Kafka?
Kafka. So I think so we had an argument at one point, a tough one on a jury a long time ago. I don't know if it was here or on your end, that had to do with intellectual content that belonged to writers whose original language was German. And the question was ownership is probably the wrong word, but who owned that, who was entitled to quote from it. And I think Wolf's sense was it only belongs to you if the text, which is written in German, belongs to you. Otherwise, translation isn't. Remember that argument?
Yeah, it was about Kafka, I think.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is it still valid?
Yeah. We always write SMS quoting Bob Dylan, and
We're getting to that.
yeah, okay. and I have the feeling that I understand what the text of Bob Dylan, but it's in English. But I can follow the double meaning or the fifth meaning of the words of Bob Dylan. But I don't know whether you guys can understand Kafka, even in the best translation. Because if I read my texts in English, I said, okay, it's only one-dimensional. Yeah?
I know what you're going to say.
And in
right.
German, it's multidimensional.
Yeah.
Because the playing with the irony or with jokes, it's almost impossible to translate. It's funny. Maybe it's the same with the architectural discussion.
Yeah, we're coming to that.
Yeah.
We're coming to that too. Okay. But no, this is really the point. I don't have an answer to that. I'm not saying who was right, if that's the point. Yeah. But the issue of a global context for a discourse on architecture and the language that accompanies it, I guess, is related in my mind to this discussion, and whether for all the consistencies from one country to another, or one city to another, or one culture to another, there are potentially obstacles. It's of interest to me to imagine, and I think I have some sense from Wolf, of the complexity of the German language and the question, for example, of whether it's possible. I'm guessing, I don't want to be the guy who is the defender of the efficacy of English, but that it is possible to understand from one language to another. And you get into other kinds of questions. In other words, is it possible to understand from one country to another, or one culture to another, or one time to another? You know, those yeah. So this is...
Culture is very difficult. Culture is almost impossible to understand a foreign culture if you are not brought up in this country or in this culture. For instance, I had a lot of problems with in China or in Dubai, and I really was uncertain whether I misunderstand the guys or they misunderstand me, but it was not the reason. The reason was, I figured it out lately, that both cultures, the Eastern culture and the Arabic culture, and this is not an evaluation, yeah, what I'm saying now, they don't have the Enlightenment.
They didn't go through that stage.
No. The European countries, for 200 years, They fought for the word self-determination. And this is what China has Lao Tzu and Buddha and things like that, but it's different. It's very different. And therefore, there's a big misunderstanding in communication. Whatever we are talking about, whatever they are talking about, we cannot get to the level of the real understanding. So it's quite clear that the president of China said, I'm fed up with this strange architecture project. And I think 1 month later, the minister of culture said, we don't believe in Western paradigms, values. And we could feel that immediately, because a lot of lectures were postponed. Books in the libraries were thrown away or disappeared. And we lost at least 3 projects because we were not willing to jump into faking the Chinese culture. So this is a real problem.
Well, let me.
It's not a problem for you guys because the United States are still the nation of power.
Whether architecture stands for that or not, so we get to in a second. So the question of the intelligibility of one language to another, Goethi in English, Goethi in German, and the question, you just mentioned this a second ago, that follows is the prospect that architecture transcends that architecture is a universality that can speak in terms of drawings and buildings that transcends the difficulties in jumping from one auditory or written language to another. And the question is that so? Or the question is, does it belong to the same kind of problematic structure as auditory and written language? I mean, it's conventionally said that architecture is a universal. The question is that so?
Not in reading, meaning not if you see your projects, the project of you guys in magazines, then it's not a problem. But if it comes to the point where the decision is made whether it's ready to be built, then it's complicated. I have the experience with projects of Tom and you when I was in a jury. It was the other jury member were from Austria and Germany. It was not, or I was not able to translate the thoughts which are, for me, clearly readable behind the project. I was not able to translate that in a German understandable language, meaning so that people are convinced that this is an architectural smashing project. I remember when your project in St. Petersburg, and Tom's library project in Vienna, and your project, the gasometer in Vienna, it was impossible. People couldn't read the plans. So this was the moment I figured out that the cultural differences. We are always talking about globalization. Globalization means, for many people, Apple, Facebook.
Yep.
But it's done in one country. And you are powerful enough to spray it all over the world.
Although even in practical terms, the uses
Yeah.
of those, I mean, we remember when AOL went into China and made the deal to do what the Chinese government wanted, which is to limit, yeah, okay. Let me jump to the
It's
next
very
one.
interesting.
So this is an old friend of yours. It's Keith Richard. This is also a question of perimeters. Who is an experimental guy. He's an experimental. We were talking about Boulez last night and people like that. An experimental guy. And I was reading a little bit this afternoon on Beggar's Banquet and Street Fighting Man, and what they went through with so he's doing the music and Jagger is doing the words. But the question is a little different, and it has to do with an issue of time and whether this continues to have a meaning or the same meaning or a changed meaning. I mean, when Street Fighting Man came out, this was like 68 or something. Vietnam War, Paris, left bank, all of that, not so much in London. So it has a meaning to us and to other people contemporaneous with that time. But looking back on it now, the question is, if it belongs to you, does it belong to something which has a completely different meaning because of what succeeded it now? It almost has to. Or does it still have the same kind of intrinsic value that it had when it showed its face?
Besides the Street Fighting Man is not a good song. It's a little bit kind of, I'm one of you guys, come to my concert. But Keith is an inventor here. He is the man who makes the sound, or made the sound of the Rolling Stones by playing an open-tuned guitar with and he removed the deep E string, yeah? So he played an open-tuned 5-string guitar. So therefore the sound is very, very different to all the other blues bands at this time. So he was very he was, by leaving away one very important string and tuned the guitar open, he created the sound of music direction, I would say. So. And it's still very lively, a little bit boring, but...
Let me go to a related topic, and I think Wolf told me a number of years ago that he learned English. I think he just said that, learned English listening to Bob Dylan, and could account for the nuances in English in a way that I couldn't in German. Dylan, who was, and probably shares something with a kind of anti-establishment context, along with the Rolling Stones. But we used to send, I think we still do from time to time, so we used to talk to each other with Dylan phraseology, which as a matter of fact, you're talking about publishing it, I'm not sure anybody would buy it. But what's interesting about that, nobody tried to do this, it just evolved as a way of speaking back and forth, is that sooner or later one of us must know, or you're stuck inside a mobile with a Memphis. I mean, they seem to resonate in terms of meanings that probably wouldn't with this audience, with meanings that belong to a particular psychological state, particularly with respect to architecture, which stuck inside a mobile still counts. We're still in that mobile. So maybe you want to say a little bit about the context in which that came up. There's probably a hereditary aspect to this, and maybe goes back, I don't know, 20, 30 years before Dylan, with a kind of Liszewski, the new man, those kinds of discussions that the world, it says here the Times They are a changing. Did they change? Did the times change?
When we heard that, we thought that we can change the times, but honestly, we lost. We lost. I have the feeling that, the description of a museum, he did in the Vision of Joanna. Yeah, inside the museum, infinity goes up on trial, is the best description. The best program for an art museum would be. But if you present this program to the client, this museum will never be built, I'm sure.
But I guess the point is that the poignancy, the relevance, it still seems to have some relevance, at least in terms of content, whether the times changed or not. Maybe they changed for a few people, and maybe that's always the way it is.
The best poem I know is Desolation Row. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to quote it, but there's a line which reminds me very much on you. And it goes like that. The original is Einstein disguised as Robin Hood, but it's much better if you read it like Eric Moss disguised as Robin Hood with his memory in his trunk. Yeah. When he passed an hour ago with his friend, a jealous monk. See, we can communicate only with Bob Dylan lines.
Okay, so did I miss this? So there was a comment last night that interested me, that James Joyce was the first rapper. I don't know whether you heard that one or missed that one. There's a discussion with Jay-Z.
That's right. Who said that?
Frank. And he said he sent a set of Joyce to Jay-Z and never heard back. But there are a couple of things, whether the intellectualization of literature or the arts or architecture belongs to the context in which you're working, whether it's useful, and whether they're a reflection of each other. And what's fascinating about this, I think everybody knows this story, whatever you know about Finnegan's Wake, which is a complex book. I think Joyce said something like, it took me 17 years to write it, and it should take you 17 years to read it. And I'm not sure that a huge number of people took him up on that. But it's fascinating in terms of continuity over time, because the line at the top, away alone, alas, loved along is the last line of the book. And the last line of the book actually is the first line of the book. It goes back to the beginning, so it's away alone, alas. So you don't get that line until you get to the end. And then when you get to the end, it goes back along the river run and so on and so on. Tying the end to the beginning in terms of a kind of conceptual cycle. And
but Frank is right.
I've never heard that said,
No.
and I'm not sure that the person to whom it was said could relate to that. But it's a fascinating kind of association across cultures and language. And you want to comment on that?
I have to say that I was very impressed by the conversation the other night. And I think that all the German-speaking schools could envy SCI-Arc, that it's possible here to have a conversation like that we heard the other night. Never ever would have that been possible in Vienna or in Innsbruck or in Germany somewhere. That two guys were sitting and talking about architecture in a different level. Never ever. So that reminded me that I'm in love with SCI-Arc, because it was the point of departure of my architectural and teaching career, to be honest. And on the other hand, when you were talking about the influence of Frank is definitely the Pope of architecture, and you guys, you LA guys, you are the cardinals or the bishop. And LA could be the Vatican, but to be honest, LA doesn't have, or this Vatican, the architectural Vatican, doesn't have the power of the real Vatican, because I can read that now in Europe, that there is a movement coming from having fear of the future, and fear always produces regression. And this movement is denying all the things you and we are now, you yesterday, and Tom and me sometimes, what we are talking about in architecture. In opposite, they say, Frank, Gary is out, it's over, and things like that. And they don't understand him, like they don't understand you're...
Help yourself, baby.
This is what Eric calls a drink, and Frank called, this is only water. If you want to have a drink, this is a pretentious red one. So,
The analogy to the Vatican is another one I hadn't heard. I'm not so sure anyone is, or if anyone is interested in playing that role in Los Angeles, they certainly will lie about it. But my sense is, because this is the next subject, because this is a project that you proposed a number of years ago, which you called an open house. And I think there's an issue of an interesting question for all of us about how you wound up connected so tightly to Los Angeles, and why Los Angeles as opposed to New York or London or whatever it is. And I think that might be of interest, along with the conception or the premise of open and openness. What's open? What's closed? What does it mean? Does it still mean, if you built this today, what would it mean in terms of that? But maybe say something about, you heard some of that LA discussion last night. What's LA? Is it the people? Is it the place? Is LA actually a banality with a few interesting characters? What kind of place is it? What brought you here?
LA and Vienna are related, and in a very curious way. What's plus 10 in Vienna, it's minus 10 here, and vice versa. So, and it's not by chance that many Austrians were living here during the Second World War, yeah? And a lot of people, Austrian and German, Viennese people were in the movie business here in Hollywood. So there is, what's open is here, it's closed in Vienna, and so forth. What I mean with openness, it's related to Popper's open society, which means open-minded society. And I could find that, or I found it here in Vienna in LA 20 years ago. But why I came to the United States, it's a very personal story, because my father, he was an architect, got a commission to do a house in Chicago in 1936. And he had everything ready, and even the ticket on a ship to go into the United States. Hitler came to Austria, and instead of going west, he had to go east as a soldier. And there is, as everyone knows, that the parents give you a commission, an unconscious commission, to do things which you have to do. Some are impossible to do, but I didn't realize that I always loved the United States because of the music, because of the democratic way of discussing things. And so when we got, by chance, a commission to build a house here, it was easy for me to come here, and to be stuck here is also clear. Because when the first time I was here, I got the address of Morphosis in the Stoner Avenue. I remember the Stoner Avenue because Rolling Stones and Stoner Avenue was in my brain very related. And I remember when Tom came in to the small, through a small door, he had the book of mine and said, please sign it, and wrote to come and say, come on, teach on SCI-Arc. And so, and the first project Rotundi showed me in LA was a project of Eric Moss. And I thought, this is a very open-minded community. It would never, ever be possible in Vienna, such a move, that an architect is showing, or Holland is showing a project of Himmelblau, or Abraham, a project of Pichler. Never, never, ever. So I was fascinated by that and figured out that this is an atmosphere where you can learn a lot, and I learned a lot by teaching here.
Let me go to what I think will be the next subject in the exhibition you did. So this has to do with this we put together of the growth of cities, urbanism over time. Can you see the image?
Yeah.
Yeah. With 4,000 years ago, and somewhat later, and somewhat later over time. And the first one we called the city of instinct, and the second one we called the city of method, and the third one we called the city of redundancy. And it's conceivable in a literal sense that the three could occur simultaneously. The question really has to do with whether the earliest one, the one that lacks method and system and rule, if you look at the way, I mean, you have to look at this closely, but if you look at the way it's put together, there is no a priori infrastructure and rule system. And it suggested to me some of what the proposition was in your plan, but maybe we get to, I want to comment on this thing, and then we'll see if we can get to you.
I think it came with the Renaissance that we got an order in our city planning. And it also, it's a dangerous thing, because Renaissance people were copying the Roman culture. And the Roman culture was a very military, technocratic culture. And not by chance, the tool of perspective was invented in the Renaissance. And that means that from this time on, space could be described in a very technocratical way. I think this method is obsolete since we discovered the outer space where there is no gravity. And this brings me to another issue. You asked me that I should write a kind of sketch for your book, New City. Yeah. And I think your proposal for Culver City cannot be compared with a traditional city planning explanation, because there is no plaza, there are no plazas, there is no street, Straßenraum, yeah? All these old-fashioned issues are not discussed in your proposal. It's rather like, and this is what I will send you. Why doesn't it work? Does it work? No. Yeah. It's rather, it doesn't work here.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah. What we, and this is one of many paradigms we had in this exhibition. We compared a new issue of city planning with the dissolving of a chess play. The Renaissance gave us the grid. The grid, like in a chess play. The figures, but the figures have the power of the draw. It's not space. They are creating space by the visionary power of the possibility the building will have. And since we are far from gridding the city, because there are many reasons we shouldn't do that, we should get lost with the technocratic grid, because there are many problems we cannot solve with a grid. So the grid of the city is dissolving into a media platform, which includes, of course, all the infrastructural needs a city should have. So if I could, doesn't work. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let me, because this ties into that. So this is 95, 96, something like that. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So this is the proposal you made when we went to Havana, and there's a comment at the bottom: city planning doesn't exist anymore. The city builds itself. If not, it's lost. Havana will be lost. And I think there was another comment somewhere in the text that said, it's not clear what to do, but we can put water pipes in.
No, we should, because Havana was losing a lot of big amount of drinking water, and we were discussing about building things while tons of water were going into the ground. And my proposal was, before we should think about new buildings, we should repair the infrastructure of the water pipelines.
But there's a politics and a sociology to that, the priorities, which doesn't seem to be part of the exhibit that you did. Well, we get to that.
Yeah.
You stand on this plan?
Yeah.
Don't fall down. So this is the last one, which just illustrated for me that I think this is a song we've talked about a little bit. But the different versions, actually. One is Dylan, Forever Young, and the other one is Jay-Z. And one of the lines in Jay-Z's Forever Young says, leave a mark that can't erase neither space nor time, so when the director yells, cut, I'll be fine, forever young. Meaning, this is a discussion that's taken place before, does the work belong to leaving a record of the work? Is that irrelevant? I mean, there's another question too, which is, I guess, forever young means an aspiration. I mean, nothing is literally forever young. So what does it mean to be forever young? You don't have to answer that. I mean, no?
I can't.
Okay.
You should have asked that, Frank.
I think he answered, actually, in a way, not quite. I mean, he was talking about staying curious. I mean, I would say that would be the equivalent. Whether that's identical, I'm not so sure. You wanna jump to this one?
No, not really, because this is the strangest exhibition I ever did in my life, because I don't understand what the topic is.
What's in the gallery?
Yeah, in the gallery, yeah.
It's your topic.
Uh-huh.
It's your topic.
Yeah, I know, but no one understands it. Me neither, because...
Well, why don't you take a crack at it?
I used the gallery and SCI-Arc as a kind of laboratory, mixing things together constantly. The ideal would have been that every day is a new plan in the gallery. We couldn't do that because of the distance. But anyway, so we used it as a laboratory. We are mixing things together and looking what's coming out. It's like a experiment. But basically, it's not a result. It's an in-between result of a big research we are doing about replacing the building lines by energy lines. Because in Europe, I don't know whether this is here an issue as well. In Europe, momentarily, the Nachhaltigkeit, sustainability is the big word, yeah? And save energy is the problem, yeah, save. And saving is always the worst. And we thought that we should investigate methods, aesthetical things, which not, in architecture, not saving energy, but producing energy. And what you can see in the gallery is in-between result of this research. It ends up in a three-dimensional master plan. I cannot, doesn't work. Which is constantly changing according to the momentarily needs of the inhabitants of a city, and producing energy by the buildings which are produced by this three-dimensional master plan. Do you understand that?
I do. I think that, no, that's a place to start. Yeah, but this is the reason for the gallery, not to do what you already knew how to do. So this is, I mean, the question is, there's the automobile city, or there's, if you go back to the Renaissance, the geometric city, or if you go to the primitive stuff that we were looking at a minute ago, at the piece at the top, the city of instinct. So there are a whole series of priorities that seem to change over time. And the question is, if you say it's the sun, it's the wind, it's the water, it's the earth, it's the green, and those are infrastructural criteria. So there are a lot of things that one could ask about that. In other words, how do you draw, why is a line that represents the sun a certain kind of line? Why is a line that represents the water a similar line? How do you know how to, I mean, what's the premise for drawing that line? And beyond that, are we drawing something which is a goal, or are we drawing something which is a current condition? And when you look at building infrastructure, just in pragmatic terms, of the billions of dollars to build a freeway from somewhere to somewhere, which one day might have worked, and now doesn't work at all, and you're stuck with it. And it seemed like the dance, or what you call the theater machine, was cheating in a way, because it was making a kind of performance out of a conceptual construction which maybe can't perform like that. In other words, the question is, can a city do that? On top of which, are we saying, you're saying the never-ending city. The question is, are you really saying the start over again somewhere else in a Sahara Desert city? In other words, the applicability of that pro forma to a contemporary city, as opposed to, and the small examples, I think the thing they're doing in London, a proposal in London with that, you said it, with that bicycle, which is a priority, but it's a big argument, because the bicycle guys are saying, don't put us up on a bicycle freeway, put us down in the streets and give us room to operate co-equal with the automobiles, as opposed to say, so a lot of these things are in a democratic political sense, very arguable discussions. And I think the last point would be that from a human point of view, we didn't yet figure out how the sun, the wind, the water, the earth, the green, your list, how that serves a deeper purpose, which is, what's a city? What's it for? Because a city surely isn't there to conserve energy. That's not the purpose of the city. That's not the meaning of the city. That if you do that, it allows you to do what? Something else.
Okay. This is just one point, one problem the city has to solve, namely the energy and in the broader sense, the infrastructure of a city. What this three-dimensional master plan is defining zones where the city or the buildings are producing, not consuming energy, but producing energy. And this is a comparison of the Viennese center. If it would be the gray one is the existing one, and the black one is the same buildings, but directed according to the master plan, so that it would be able that these buildings are producing this amount of energy, which are the people there consuming. This is just one thing. The cultural background is the meta surface we have to discuss. And this is the cultural surface, which is really in a new, it's breaking down. The old system in Europe is breaking down, and people, and we are in big troubles. We are in big troubles now because everyone is trying to breaking these rules and regulation of an open society. Yeah, in the Ukraine, Greece is trying to do it, and you can feel that everyone in Europe is frightened of the future. Yeah, therefore they are building now buildings which are looking like the towers of a castle with windows like defensing slits, and the walls are thick because of saving energy. But that reminds me on the very thick walls of a castle, which is for defending themselves. So this is a very big issue right now.
But what you're saying,
going in a very, and the young people are going in a very, very conservative direction.
right? I think all I'm asking is that when you look at it, so it's appealing, it's beautiful, but the question is its meaning as an object, or is its meaning in a serious way to address issues of urbanism? Because if it is, it's sitting on an implied social and political premise which isn't mentioned actually.
No, it's
but
a
could
strategic. It's not an architectural plan, it's a strategic plan. And it's, this is what I think the future of our profession should be, otherwise we are going down. Yeah. I don't have the feeling in the United States and in your discussion, is that a point? But in Europe, it's a big point.
Well, let me just ask you one other thing, which is when you say it's strategic, do you mean it's a tactical way
strategic.
But strategic, that it can materialize, it can happen.
No. This strategic is the plan, it's the overall plan, and tactic is how to fulfill this plan. We are not that far, but our brain is working in a very fascinating way. Yeah, the synapses are not ordered hierarchically nor basic democratic. Our thoughts are produced along the problem, sometimes very upside down, and sometimes very from down to up. So that means that
You're talking about the operation of the brain.
The operation of our brain, yeah. If according to the problem, we are thinking very straightforward or more democratic, and I think this could be the role model for the politics in city planning. And as soon we have finished this study, maybe we know more whether it's possible or not. But I can see that in China, where big offices, American and English offices, are moving in with the worst city plan you can imagine. And they are ruining their culture right now by reproducing all the mistakes the American cities have already behind them. Yeah? But the marketing is great from these big offices, so they are very successful.
Let me just ask you.
It's the wrong way to solve the future problems of cities.
Let me go back to this, and I don't know that there's any physiological expertise here. Certainly not on my end on the operation of the brain, how the brain works. But in a mental construction where I don't want to assign this to the brain, but there are repetitive actions or protective actions, there's a kind of redundancy in what we do based on, I think, what you've learned to do. And it seems to me that the argument ought to be that you have to reteach the brain in a way, rather than relying on the brain, which again, this is what I know to do. If the desk falls, I'll jump. The way that the opposite of way. Yeah. The other point would be memory. That part of a mental construction is not only what you might do tomorrow, which you pointed out, at least in many European countries and other places, maybe America too, is loaded with apprehension, fear, the future. So that the secure way is to build a crenellated building with thick walls and small apertures and shoot arrows out of the windows and put alligators in the moat. you know, or something.
Minefields.
But what I'm saying is that even the metaphor of the
Yeah.
brain has a retrogressive aspect, you know what I mean? I'm not sure that's right, but maybe that's less the point.
That it mean that our brain doesn't learn from a certain age on, but this is not correct. Still working, learning, changing. That's fascinating.
Not to be
With all
stuck
the
in.
mistakes we are doing, the perfection is not on our side.
Or anywhere. I think the concept of perfect doesn't, I mean, there are tsunamis, and there are plane crashes, and there are sicknesses. I mean, what is perfection anyway? We just
Yeah,
try to
but,
move it forward a
our
little bit.
society is going for perfection. Everything must be perfect.
What
yeah.
society? So maybe the goal should be the opposite of that. Let's make it imperfect, we have a better chance. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Anybody want to offer some additions, corrections, comments? I can't see, but if you...
Why does
Okay, thank you for coming. See you soon.